I would now like to introduce myself for a programs report. Hi. Your Leadership Institute has trained 5,047 conservative activists at 174 Get Out the Vote, GOTV, trainings this year. Very exciting stuff. GOTV trainings are 3 or more hours in duration and contain a minimum of 2 hours of GOTV-specific lectures, which may include, buckle up, targeting and voter identification, canvassing, digital and social media outreach, mail and literature drops, early voting and absentee voting, transportation and voting logistics, volunteer mobilization, election day coordination, and post-election follow-up. 174 programs across the country, more than 5,000 conservative activists trained, many of those programs in just the last couple of months. Our team that goes out, more than 20 trainers who go out across the country, are engaging with conservative activists on the ground level to teach them how to make the impact of their conversations with voters and friends in churches and in community activities as productive as they can be. It's very exciting stuff. You can join me for a unique Lunch and Learn webinar tomorrow afternoon at 1 p.m. Eastern, called Going Viral on Election Day. Many of you know I had an interaction on Election Day 2023 with an unhinged leftist just about a mile from here. I took that experience from distributing sample ballots in my personal capacity as an activist to a national appearance on Fox News and distilled it into a step-by-step how-to for all of you and all of you online to do this in your own capacity on Election Day or before. If you plan to engage voters at the polls this year, especially in places like Arlington or Los Angeles, I encourage you to attend this 1-hour training tomorrow. It's online. You can find Going Viral on Election Day and dozens of other Leadership Institute trainings at leadershipinstitute.org/training. And of course, none of this would be possible without the generous support of Leadership Institute's very generous donors who invest in our programs and believe in our mission. So please give a round of applause for our donors this morning. I will now introduce Kristen Lewin, who will introduce our Wednesday Wake Up Club breakfast speaker. Kristen Lewin was born and raised in Bozeman, Montana, a very exciting place right now. She attended college online for 3 years at Regent University in Virginia Beach before moving to campus to finish her degree. Majoring in international studies was a challenge for Kristen. Her first year in school, her major was discontinued. She learned to innovate as she had to substitute classes because most of hers were cut. As she studied, Kristen fell in love with international politics. She graduated from college in May of 2023 and chose to pursue a master's in government, which will be completed in 2025. She has ambitions to receive a PhD from Regent University. Very exciting. While in college, she helped found the Regent University's Model United Nations chapter and held positions on the executive board in public relations and vice president. In 2020, Kristen became a volunteer for Operation Underground Railroad, OUR. Kristen became a project manager in Montana for OUR, and she launched a project similar to Operation Christmas Child. Human trafficking is one of her key policy issues, and she hopes one day to work for a nonprofit specializing in anti-human trafficking efforts. In her free time, Kristen loves to hike, kayak, roast coffee beans, write novels, paint, and basket weave, all things I think of when I think of Montana. She is currently translating one of her novels into Spanish in an effort to learn the language. Kristen is our CLC and fundraising intern. Kristen, please come introduce Will Estrada.
Hello. So I have the honor of introducing our speaker, William Estrada. Will is a husband, dad, attorney, and serves as Senior Counsel at HSLDA, the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, an organization that has worked to make homeschooling possible since 1983. He is a member of the following state and federal bars: U.S. Supreme Court, First Circuit Court of Appeals, 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, California, and District of Columbia. In July of 2023, he was appointed by Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin to serve a 4-year term on the Board of Visitors of Christopher Newport University in Newport News, Virginia. In October of 2023, he was elected to serve on the advisory board of the Parental Rights Foundation. Will's past experience includes serving in the federal government with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Office for the Civil Rights and serving the president of ParentalRights.org and the Parental Rights Foundation. Over the course of Will's career, he has testified before Congress and multiple state legislatures, drafted federal and state legislation, worked on federal regulations both from outside and from inside the federal government, and met with members of Congress, cabinet secretaries, and senior officials from federal agencies and the executive branch, as well as governors and elected and appointed officials at the state and local level. Will and his wife, Rachel, have 2 sons, Dominic and Merrick, and live in Northern Virginia. Please welcome William A. Estrada. And please hold for questions until the end. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. As you can tell from Kristen's kind introduction, I am a lawyer and a swamp creature, so I don't know why Matthew invited me here to speak, but I am glad to be here. Do we have my PowerPoint up, or am I going to have to wing this and tell stories? Do we know? There's a clicker. All right, let's see what happens. Click. I'm fine telling stories. Point it somewhere. Point it there. Push another button. You know, my Will Estrada's tech, aha, there we go. We do have a PowerPoint. All righty. Will Estrada's tech career is basically just pushing buttons and kicking things. But since this is, what time is it? 8:17 on a rainy Wednesday morning when we haven't seen the sun for a bunch of days, I'm going to wake us up with a pop quiz. So I have, in my formerly nicotine-stained hands, a genuine faux leather HSLDA 25th anniversary little thing, you know, with the pad inside. And I've got 2 questions, and we'll see how wide awake you guys are. First question, when was the first education law passed in America? Anyone know the answer? The first education law passed in America. No, not federal, not state. Note. I'll give a hint. I did not say the United States. I said America. So anyone want to hazard a guess? Come on, guess, you know. All right.
I'm guessing the late 1600s in Massachusetts.
Anyone?
1619
1619
Virginia.
Virginia. That's, you know what? I'm going to give it to you because it was the Old Deluder Satan Act of 1647 in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. The very first education law in America, but honorable mention right here. The very first education law passed in America, and it begins with, so that our children will learn to read and not be fooled by our old deluder Satan. And then it goes on and on about how townships need to pass laws to make sure that children can read so they can read the Bible so they're not deluded by Satan. The very first education law in America, not the United States. Second question. So you got a second chance here. When was the very first U.S. Supreme Court case mentioning parental rights? Anyone know? A little closer to our lives. Very first U.S. Supreme Court case dealing with parental rights. Come on, Matthew, you know the answer to this, right?
I can't accept the award.
Oh, very, very humble man. He can't accept the award. Someone hazard a guess. 19th century? Nope. All right. I guess I... Which one? 1960. Nope. I guess I get to keep this. 1923, Meyer versus Nebraska, and we will talk about that case. So Good job. Good to have you all here. Great job throwing out the questions. I've done a lot of interesting things in my career so far. As Kristen said, I've been at Homeschool Legal Defense. I went into the federal government. You will even find my name in the Project 2025 Mandate for Leadership book. Every time my liberal friends are like, did you hear that Project 2025 is going to deport all women to Mars? I'm like, well, actually, my name is in Project 2025. And I pull it over there. And then they're like, but you're a nice person. And I'm like, well, maybe you should think about that. Maybe I'm not a nice person, though. Maybe I'm a swamp creature. But anyway, I'm back at Homeschool Legal Defense Association. Matthew had me speak, I think, a year and a half ago when I was president of the Parental Rights Foundation, and I am thrilled to be working and advocating on behalf of homeschoolers all around the country. I handle California, I handle Pennsylvania, I handle the District of Columbia and a bunch of other states, and do some of the federal work for Homeschool Legal Defense as well. Before I talk about homeschooling, though, I want to take a step back, though, and talk about parental rights, because it's near and dear to my heart. I recently wrote a law review article about parental rights and homeschooling. It's not the nerdiest thing I've ever done. The nerdiest thing I've ever done is go to a Star Trek convention and meet William Shatner. So I am a nerd, but I also wrote this. But the reason why, and I want to take us back to the Scots. And Andrew Fletcher was a Scottish patriot. What that means essentially is, William Wallace, like freedom sort of thing. But he was more of a writer than a fighter. So, and what he said, and I think it's for all of us, whether you're involved in parental rights or homeschooling, whatever the battle might be, is let me make the songs of a nation, and I care not who makes its laws. What does that mean? I think it means the culture is so important to what we're doing. Politics is important, but oftentimes we'll have these debates. I'm a follower of Jesus Christ myself. I'm a person of faith, but often we have these debates of is politics more important, or religion, or culture? And I think what Andrew Fletcher said, however, was the culture is so important. But also part of this is singing those songs and remembering those songs. And that's why I wrote this law review, to tell the stories of the past. It's called Homeschooling in the United States, A Seismic Parental Rights Victory. You can search for it. Homeschooling in the United States, A Seismic Parental Rights Victory by Will Estrada. You'll find it's at Liberty University. You can also grab the screenshot there, and that's it. But what I wanted to do was I went through the history of parental rights, because homeschooling is under that umbrella of parental rights. And I decided, in the words of Inigo Montoya from The Princess Bride, to go back to the beginning. And so where is the beginning? In the beginning. And so I traced parental rights through the Jewish scriptures, the Torah, the rabbinical teachings, what many Christians would call the Old Testament, and then the New Testament, then the Quran. I only looked at the Abrahamic religions, so Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. I didn't go into some of the Eastern religions or other religions, but I wanted to see what some of the oldest faith traditions in our world say about parental rights. Then I went through the Greek philosophers, the English common law, then of course brought it back to the United States Supreme Court, and then jumped ahead to look more modernly at homeschooling itself. I'm going to give you a quick 10,000 years of recorded human history review in about 10 minutes about the state of parental rights. So, you guys ready? Buckle up. If you need extra coffee, it's there, but I'll try to make this entertaining. Are you not entertained? But I thought I'd start with Judaism. And the late Rabbi Jonathan Sacks wrote very well about Judaism. Of course, many of us, especially in Christian and Jewish faith traditions, we know the great Shema. We know the words in Deuteronomy of Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. Then it goes on to teach your children when you're walking, when you're sitting down, when you're sleeping, etc., etc. This understanding that the family came from God, and the family is the most important way that we pass on our values, we pass on our traditions, we pass on learning. And then the government comes afterward. That's a very fundamental difference from a lot of the politicians that are running around today. Does the family come first, or does government come first? Is the family more important, or is the state more important? And you're going to hear that refrain as we go through this. But here's what Rabbi Jonathan Sacks said. If there's one element of Judaism I'd love to share with everyone, it's this. If you want to survive and thrive as a people, a culture, a civilization, celebrate the family. Hold it sacred. Eat together. Tell the story of what most matters to you across the generations. Make children the most important people. Put them center stage. Encourage them to ask questions. The more the better. That's what Moses said 33 centuries ago. and Judaism is still here to tell the tale, having survived some of the most brutal persecutions in human history. Yet, as a religious faith, we're still young and full of energy. That kind of sums up the Jewish view of parental rights. Tell the stories. Have it be involved in the family. Jonathan Sachs was a great writer and speaker. He passed away in 2012. I encourage you to review some of what he said. All right. Then parental rights in the New Testament. How many of you have Matthew Henry's commentaries on the Bible? Again, I said I'm a nerd. Oh, okay, I see a bunch of hands. So Matthew Henry was 16th, 17th century. He was a Protestant theologian, and I love what he wrote about Ephesians 6. Of course, for those of you who are Christians, you remember Ephesians 6, children obey your parents. Parents, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. So I was like, well, what, nerd, Will Estrada, what does Matthew Henry say about education and parental rights? And so I started reading, and I mean, these words were leaping off the page. Now, I've got 2 kids. My wife and I have 2 kids, Dominic, age 12, Merrick, age 7, and you want to be a good parent, right? Can I get an amen? And some of what Matthew Henry was saying, I was like, this was 318 years ago, and this is just as relevant for today in the 21st century as it was back in 1706, as it was in AD 50, as it was in 2000 BC. Give them a good education. This is Matthew Henry in his commentary on the Bible, Ephesians chapter 6, talking about children and parents. It is the great duty of parents to be careful in the education of their children, not only bringing them up as the brutes or as animals do, taking care to provide for them, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition in such a manner as is suitable to their reasonable natures. Nay, not only bring them up as men in nurture and admonition, but as Christians in the admonition of the Lord. Let them have a religious education. And I was very struck by that. Now, of course, in the United States, going back to Old Deluder Satan Act, we've had public schools in this country. We've had private schools in this country. Historically, they mainly were Roman Catholic private schools because most of the public education in our country was Protestant. And as you had a lot of the anti-Catholic bias, Blaine amendments, for example, the public schools were pushing Protestantism, and devout Roman Catholic families were trying to have private schools. And that's where the first debate over parental rights in our country came from. But also we have homeschooling as well. So there's a range of education for parents who wish to do, as Matthew Henry said, let their children have a religious education. Okay. Parental rights in Jewish scriptures, parental rights in Christian scriptures. Then I wanted to look at Quranic scriptures, what the Quran says about parental rights. And I was really interested. There's a dearth of what I would say scholarly writings about parental rights in the Quran. I actually had to find a journal, International Journal of Pediatrics, published from the University of Tehran, actually, in Iran. That was the best kind of Islamic writing on parental rights that I was able to find. So if there are any legal scholars out there that want to write a Quranic review of parental rights, you would be probably top of the search algorithms if you did that, because there's just not a lot there. But it was very interesting kind of reading through this. My law review, I include a lot of quotes from both that medical journal and from the Quran. And then Surah Nisa, verse 1, respect the womb that bore you. Surah Anam, verse 151, you have to be kind to your parents. But more importantly, the Quran, just like the Jewish and Christian scriptures, has the family as the building block of society. Not the state, the family. And that was kind of the traditional view for thousands of years until the Greek philosophers came up. Now, some people love the Greek philosophers. How many of you have read Plato's Republic in this room? Matthew, of course, raising a good bunch of hands. Of course, the Patrick Henry College contingent has read Plato's Republic because that's what they do at Patrick Henry. They go back and look at the original writings. Patrick Henry College can send me a check for advertising later, hopefully. But Plato was not someone I like. Obviously, he was involved. Our founders relied heavily on him, but he wrote about parental rights. And I've talked to people who love Plato. I mean, he's like dead and gone and buried and in the dust. But they're like, oh, Plato's great. And they're like, he didn't really mean what he said about parental rights. He was making just kind of a going over the top sort of thing. And I'm like, well, I don't know. But here's what he said. The wives of our guardians. This is in Plato's Republic. You know, the guardians of the Republic, these people who were the the bureaucrats, basically. As a former bureaucrat, I can say that, who would protect the republic. So these are the guardians. The wives of our guardians are to be common, and their children are to be common, and no parent is to know his own child, nor any child his parent. It takes a village. They're all our children. You know what we hear from bureaucrats and statists, from Hillary Clinton to Melissa Harris Perry to James Dwyer over at William and Mary University, that refrain, Plato said it first. The kids are to be common. Wives are to be common. Basically, there's no family. He actually went on. He said children with disabilities should be left to die. I mean, very dystopian view of what Plato had in the Republic. Was he joking? Was he serious? I think he was serious, but, you know, talk to your favorite Plato friend and see what he or she says. Now, Aristotle, to his credit, had a different view. Aristotle was a student of Plato's. Aristotle disagreed with Plato, and he said the friendship between man and wife seems to be inherent in us by nature. Procreation is a bond more universal to all living things than living in a city. Aristotle didn't really like cities. He liked the country. He liked looking at animal life, but Aristotle kind of went back to that Jewish view. Again, Christianity had not come, Islam had not come yet, but he went back to that Jewish view of the family being the most important part of civilization. And then Plutarch, he's in the Greek philosophers, but he was a Roman philosopher, but because the Romans didn't make anything of their own, they just took the Greek philosophy and just made it their own, different names of the gods, for example. Plutarch in 119 AD writes, nature bestows on humanity a kind love and tender affection towards his children. And again, like Aristotle, looking at the animal kingdom, he goes back and he says, you know what? Nature can show us that the family comes first. That's where society is based on. So all's right with the world. Despite Plato, we're back to that view that the family predates the state. The family is the most important one. Whether or not you believe God created the family or the gods or they just came, everyone said we can look at nature and see that the family predates society. So we're back to, as my friend Melissa Moskela at Catholic University of America says, the family is pre-political, meaning they come before the state. And that's very important because when we're talking about parental rights, to whom do children belong? It's that debate. State first, the government first, or the family and civil society first. Then parental rights in English common law. I go through all of this in much more detail in the law review. I look at John Locke. I look at William Blackstone. And they go, and again, John Locke as a Christian goes back to Adam and Eve and all the parents, the laws of nature created by the Almighty, etc., etc. Why is this important? Why are a bunch of dead, not all of them are white people, but most of them are. Why is a bunch of dead, mostly white men, important? Why are we looking at this today? Well, some people would say that it's not important. But our Supreme Court has said that the history and traditions of our country are very important, and particularly as we're going to a more textual-based, proud member of the Federalist Society. Man, I'm really outing myself here today, Matthew. Project 2025, Federalist Society. I'm a member of the vast right-wing conspiracy, I guess. Remember when Hillary Clinton said that of the vast right-wing conspiracy was out to get Bill Clinton? I love that line. For those of you who are young, Google vast right-wing conspiracy. But in a very important case, Washington versus Glucksberg, which is not too long ago, 1997, the Supreme Court said the Due Process Clause specially protects those fundamental rights and liberties which are objectively deeply rooted in this nation's history and tradition. There's a great law review by my friend Hugh Phillips. He went to Liberty University School of Law. It's called Liberating Liberty, How the Glucksberg Test Can Solve the Supreme Court's Confusing Jurisprudence on Parental Rights. I'm not going to get into this. This is like really deep in the weeds of nerddom, 14th Amendment, substantive due process rights, fundamental rights, all that sort of thing. We can just kind of keep it here because it's, 8:30 on a rainy Wednesday morning, that parental rights are fundamental and they are protected and ought to be protected, and we have to continue to keep them protected. So that's why I like going to the history and tradition. But let's kind of move closer to home. Parental rights in the U.S. Supreme Court. I go through actually about 14 cases in the U.S. Supreme Court in my law review article. None of them mention homeschooling. This gets back to that history of what I said about parental rights in our country, first starting in that nexus between private schools, and essentially it was the Catholic private schools fighting for all of our freedom in the early 1920s. So remember the early 1900s. You had industrialization, you had World War I, you had a huge amount of anti-German sentiment going on. I mean, look at some of the like war bonds from not even World War II, but from World War I. It was like, oh, this is like creeping Christian nationalism sort of thing with anti-German and Protestant America, and those evil Catholics are coming by, and we had Joseph Blaine passing Blaine amendments, which you hear about all the time in the battle over school choice and ESAs. Essentially, Blaine amendments were saying no public funds can go to private or sectarian schools, mainly sectarian schools, because Joseph Blaine hated the Roman Catholic Church. There was a lot of xenophobia going on because the immigrants at that time were primarily poor Catholic, poor Jewish, Eastern European, Ireland sort of immigrants that were coming over. And in that kind of vortex in the early 1900s, we began to pass a lot of nativist laws. First and foremost, Nebraska passed a law, this is Meyer versus Nebraska, that banned the instruction of children in any language other than English. So Robert Meyer was a teacher in a one-room schoolhouse in Nebraska, and he was teaching a 10-year-old German boy how to read using the Martin Luther translation of the German Bible. So it was German. He was teaching him to read the Bible in that, and then he's like, well, once we teach him German and how to read, then we can teach him English. The day the law was passed, the district attorney in the county came to the one-room schoolroom, and the district attorney personally arrested Robert Meyer after watching him teach the kid. I mean, how often do district attorneys actually arrest people? If you're a Kamala Harris district attorney, you don't arrest anyone. You don't even prosecute anyone. Sorry for going down there. That was not endorsed by LI. Or was it? I don't know. You'll have to ask Matthew Hurt later. But they're a 501c3, so the views of LI do not the views of Will Estrada do not necessarily reflect the views of LI. Don't want you to get in trouble there, Matthew. And the U.S. Supreme Court, Robert Meyer was convicted. The U.S. Supreme Court overturned the conviction and said that because the parents had gone to a private school, they were the ones who could decide how their children was educated. You go and you kind of read through Meyer versus Nebraska, and it's kind of a weak case. There aren't really any juicy quotes or anything, but this was the very first time the U.S. Supreme Court wrestled with parental rights and a state law. And interestingly, they quote Plato. They quote that line that I had mentioned about Plato's Republic, and they say something along the lines of, although men of great repute have said really important things and were involved and were relied upon by our founders, we don't accept everything they said about parental rights because our founders wrote in the Constitution that the rights not given to the government are left to the people, and so we think the parents have the right to choose what sort of school they have for their children. So it was a good case. But 2 years later, an even better case came. This is Pierce versus Society of Sisters. Oregon had passed a law banning all private education. It was a Ku Klux Klan law. You go back and in my law review, I have newspapers and other articles where the KKK is taking credit for passing this law. I mean, that's a great victory just for freedom. That it used to be the KKK was passing laws and running the show, and now they're basically gone. Of course, hate is not gone because we have sin in our hearts. We need a savior, but I digress. Again, going off script here, Matthew. Don't fire me. But it was a Catholic school and a non-sectarian military school that challenged this Oregon law. And the case went up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court unanimously struck down Oregon's law. And I love their line that they say. And this line is really kind of my rallying cry. Next year is going to be the 100th anniversary of Pierce versus Society of Sisters. Last year was the 100th anniversary of Meyer versus Nebraska, but we should be like pulling out the bunting and celebrating Pierce versus Society of Sisters. Just kind of big picture, when you think of the battle for parental rights, 100 years ago, the battle was, could private schools exist? And we've won that battle. Private education is succeeding, is growing. 40 years ago, the battle was over homeschooling. Could parents homeschool their children? We won that battle. Homeschooling is growing. I'll talk about that more briefly. The battle today is parental rights in the context of the public school classroom. I don't know how that battle is going to turn out. Maybe in question and answer we can talk about some of that. But It's one. I'm a glass half full type of guy. You could be, oh no, parental rights are under attack, or you could be like, we've won the private school, it's not even a challenge. We've won the homeschool, not even a challenge. Now the battle is public school. So that's Will Estrada's optimist moment for you. The fundamental theory of liberty, upon which all government in this union repose, excludes any general power of the state to standardize its children by forcing them to accept instruction from public teachers only. The child is not the mere creature of the state. Those who nurture him and direct his destiny have the right, coupled with the high duty, to recognize and prepare him for additional obligations. 1925, U.S. Supreme Court, Pierce versus Society of Sisters. Wisconsin versus Yoder, another very important parental rights case. The Amish Old Order Mennonites in Wisconsin would pull their children out of public school after 8th grade. Of course, 8th grade education back then was like college education today, sort of inflation with our schools. But they were prosecuted, they were fined, they weren't going to appeal, nonviolent, honoring government. A Mennonite lawyer actually encouraged them, you've got to appeal because we have a higher standard, God's laws. They did. The U.S. Supreme Court overturned their convictions. And again, just a really good line, end sentence. This primary role of the parents in the upbringing of their children is now established beyond debate as an enduring American tradition. So again, parental rights. That was kind of the last gasp of the fights against private schools and parents pulling children out of public school. And these cases, Meyer, Pierce, Wisconsin versus Yoder, were the cases that Mike Farris, Mike Smith, the other pioneering lawyers who founded Homeschool Legal Defense Association in 1983 relied upon as they made their arguments for homeschooling. One more case. The last time the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled on parental rights was 2000, 24 years ago, and it was a grandparent visitation case. It wasn't even an education case. But what they said was the liberty interest at issue in this case, the interest of parents in the care, custody, and control of their children, is perhaps the oldest of the fundamental liberty interests recognized by this court. In light of this extensive precedent, it cannot now be doubted that the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment protects the fundamental right of parents to make decisions concerning the care, custody, and control of their children. So again, the battle right now is in the context of public schools. The Supreme Court really hasn't weighed in on those. There's a bad bunch of circuit court cases that have really weakened parental rights in public schools. There are some cases going to the U.S. Supreme Court, particularly dealing with public schools keeping secrets from parents about their minor children. So I think we'll see some of those cases. There's also cases coming up about curriculum decisions. I think honestly, the parents are going to lose in those cases. The court, I don't think, wants to become a super school board. So we'll just have to wait and see. But that's the last time the U.S. Supreme Court has weighed in on parental rights. So now let's turn to homeschooling in our last few minutes. I've got 8 minutes left, and I want to leave a couple of minutes for questions. Right, I stop at 8:50, right, Matthew? Okay. Well, he kind of shrugged, so we can keep going, right? No, we got places to go and people to meet. These cases could have turned out, homeschooling could have turned out very differently if the Catholics and the parents and the Mennonites and the Amish had lost these cases back in the 1920s and 1940s and 1970s. But today, homeschooling is legal and is growing. Here's just some homeschooling details. Homeschoolers want to be left alone. We just don't want anything from the government. Homeschooling works. I'm a homeschool graduate myself. My wife and I homeschool our kids. Leave us alone. There's a federal statute that protects homeschool freedom, but basically it just says nothing in federal law is meant to apply to homeschools, whether treated as a homeschool or private school under state law. There's been significant growth of homeschoolers. We're up to about 5, maybe 6% of the school-age population, so just under 4 million students are being educated at home. There was a National Center for Education Statistics report that came out on September 17th, 2024. I encourage you to read it. It was fascinating, talking about why parents are homeschooling, why parents are private schooling. Not too long. It's like a 20-page report, so you can Google NCES report, September 17th, 2024, if you want more details. This is kind of a map of the state of play. There's 50 state laws governing homeschooling. Some states like Texas are completely free. California is almost essentially free when it comes to homeschooling. Pennsylvania, New York, you can see those red states. It's the New England states. Massachusetts Bay Colony, where we still have significant problems dealing with homeschool freedom. I handle Pennsylvania for HSLDA, and 90% of my contacts come from Pennsylvania, of school districts just harassing families, trying to get more paperwork, trying to keep them from homeschooling. I hardly ever have problems in California. Pennsylvania is one of the busiest states that I have. So we're still busy representing homeschool families, protecting the right of parents to be able to choose how to educate their children. This is a huge string citation, so ignore it. Basically, too long, didn't read, is that 27 states have some protection of the fundamental right of parents to direct the education, upbringing of their children in state law. I'll have my email at the end. You can email me if you want the slideshow, if you want to see where you are. Of course, Virginia Code Annotated Section 1-240.1 has a very strong fundamental parental rights law. Notably, however, it does not give parents a private right of action to sue. So the only way this law can be enforced is for Jason Miyares and the Attorney General's office to sue. I love Attorney General Miyares, but I wish they would do more lawsuits against school districts to enforce this law. So next time you talk to Jason Miyares, encourage him to have the Attorney General's office just start filing lawsuits in state court to protect the fundamental right of parents, because until we can get a private right of action which gives parents the ability to sue to vindicate their rights, this law is only enforceable by our Attorney General. But yeah, we can skip that one. Alrighty, my email, my Twitter handle. I left off my Instagram. I don't have any other social. I have Facebook. Everyone has Facebook. And then my cell phone. Would love to stay in touch with you. We have 4 minutes and 18 seconds. So questions. How do we do questions, Matthew? And then Ava next. Yes, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Estrada. That was an outstanding presentation. I
Good
really
to see
appreciate
you. Thank you.
Your coming. You did leave out the Egyptians. It's an oversight I'll forgive. But I do want to tap into your optimism and your perspective on education, whether in primary, secondary, or college education. What's the next big thing? What are you looking at?
Wow. Higher education is in trouble. I'm on the Board of Visitors of Christopher Newport University. It's very interesting. We have a demographic crisis coming of less students, because less people are having kids, but also less high school graduates going to college. So the value of of higher education is being questioned right now. And some of it is real, actually most of it is really the fault of institutions of higher education. The anti-Semitism that we're seeing on college campuses is just absolutely awful. And it's making a lot of students be like, I'm not going to go to higher education, or parents not to pay for it. So I think higher education is the biggest thing. We're also seeing innovation in K through 12 education, micro schools, learning pods. The state of Georgia 2 years ago passed the Learning Pod Protection Act. They put it in the homeschool statute because the homeschoolers are kind of the original gangster when it comes to learning pods and micro schools. But look at learning pods, look at micro schools. Obviously, education savings accounts are allowing parents to take the money, get tax credits, or actually, this is a bad word, but vouchers. That's essentially what a lot of ESAs are, to be able to take some of that money and put their kids in private schools. So all of that is very, very exciting to see the innovations that are coming. Great question. Thank you. Ava had her hand up.
Yes, sorry. Thank you. I'll stand. So kind of a nerdy legal question.
I like nerdy legal questions.
Justice Clarence Thomas argues that substantive due process should be done away with. With abortion and the right to privacy, they claim, or formally claim, that it falls within the penumbra of the 14th Amendment. So where does the institution of family fall within substantive due process? And if we were to do away with it, how would it fall if such an endeavor came to fruition?
Ava, that is a great question. Are you going to law school? Okay, I figured as much. So Justice Clarence Thomas has never liked substantive due process. Substantive due process is kind of this judge-made thing. It was Griswold versus Connecticut, the contraceptives case back in the 60s. Roe versus Wade, penumbras and emanations emanating from the due process clause. That's where they found the right to an abortion from substantive due process rights. In 2000, in Justice Clarence Thomas's concurrence to Troxell versus Granville, Clarence Thomas said, and my old boss, Mike Farris, was very, very concerned about this. Clarence Thomas said that he didn't think that there should be substantive due process rights, protecting parental rights, that it should come out of some other right. Scalia went even further and said, I don't see parental rights in the Constitution. I'm not going to protect them. And that was even more troubling as well. And then recently in the Dobbs decision, Clarence Thomas has again reiterated that he doesn't like substantive due process rights, which concerns us because that's the constitutional, what Meyer versus Nebraska, Pierce versus Society of Sisters, Wisconsin versus Yoder, many other cases relied upon to protect parental rights. So if, if a certain candidate gets elected and puts 3 more justices on the Supreme Court, and we have 9 justices who are strict constructionists who don't like fundamental substantive due process rights, what will happen to parental rights? That's why I put this slide here, because I knew you were going to ask that question, Ava. I encourage you to read Hugh Phillips' Liberating Liberty, because he goes back to, let's look at the Glucksberg test from 1997. Glucksberg is a great decision. It was a assisted suicide decision out of Washington, but the court kind of goes off on rabbit trails about fundamental rights, and they put in this this deeply rooted in the nation's history and tradition. And what Hugh writes, there's actually a podcast on the Parental Rights Foundation, epic broadcast. I can send you the link if you want. I interviewed Hugh after his law review came out, and he's even nerdier than I am. I mean, he's like a bajillion smart. I'm like a 10 smart. And so it's like most of what he said went over my head. So he's really smart, but he broke it down really well and encouraged you to look at the Glucksberg test, what he was saying, because there's more lawyers out there. Mike Farris did a law review article just recently of saying, let's look at some other way. Mike said, let's look at procedural due process instead of substantive due process, but very interesting. Do we have time for one more question, Matthew? All right. Yes, sir.
Hi. If I could mention 2 books that the nerds from Patrick Henry might be interested in, and yourself as well. The Controversy of Zion by Douglas Reed, R-E-E-D, and Rulers of Evil, subtitled Useful Knowledge About Governing Bodies by Frederick Tupper Saucy. The latter book is about the history of the Jesuits as a military order of the Roman Church for nearly 500 years, but their mandates were to counter the Reformation, but almost as importantly, to be the confessors of the wealthy and powerful and educators of their children. And of course, Jesuit schools are very prominent, powerful in the U.S. And the author actually attributes America breaking from the British, away from Britain, to the Jesuits, it being a strategy that Roman Catholics were not allowed to vote or hold public office in any of the British territories in the late 1700s. And if the American colonies were to break away, that given enough time, a few centuries, that Roman Catholics could rise to public office and establish themselves as a dominant force. Interesting.
I will say, just as a final comment, and then thank you for that, and then turn it over to Matthew. Really, America is, this is going to be your dose of rah-rah America here. America is really an incredible country. We have, by the grace of God, avoided the sectarian wars that, plagued and even to a certain extent still plague Europe. Maryland was a Roman Catholic colony. Georgia was a fairly Roman Catholic colony, Oglethorpe. Rhode Island had a crazy wacko guy who was so, he couldn't, no one, he actually left his own wife because he couldn't agree with her religious views. But all of that came together to give us the United States of America. How many of you have read James Madison's Memorial and Remonstrance? Any of you read it? Go back and just Google James Madison Memorial and Remonstrance. And what James Madison did, the Virginia Bay Colony, the Virginia colony was trying to pass a tax to fund religious churches and religious education. And Madison comes out of retirement and writes this and gives this speech to say, no, we don't want to force people to be supporting religious views that they might disagree with. We need to have tolerance. We need to have respect for the differing religious views. And that really is the heritage that our country is based on. It's beautiful, and I love it. Matthew, thank you for having me come and speak. Folks, thank you for having me today. I'll be sticking around as well.
Don't go anywhere, Will. We invited Will Estrada to join us for this Wednesday Wake Up Club because very few locations in D.C. before 9 a.m. are you going to get such an exciting PowerPoint presentation with Will, who is high energy all the time without as much of the coffee as I had. And as you know, We always give our Wednesday Wake Up Club Breakfast speaker an Adam Smith tie or a scarf, depending upon one of the two genders. And so you can guess what is in this box. Will, surprise. Oh, it is a tie, just in case you were wondering. Thank you so much, Will. And Will is just one of the greatest activists in the homeschool space and the parental rights space, and he's local. And so it's always good to see him at meetings like this. And of course, he's been fighting for us for a long time, even on the inside of the federal government. So yeah, it's great. Thanks so much, Will. Join us on Wednesday, November 6th. One day after the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November for an exciting Wednesday Wake Up Club breakfast review of the election with President and founder of Americans for Tax Reform, Grover Norquist. He'll be with us giving his observations about whatever happened in the 12 hours prior. I encourage you to RSVP online at leadershipinstitute.org/breakfast. Kevin Tober, if you'll join me up here. I invite anyone who is interested in a tour of the Stephen P.J. Wood Building, which is where we are right now in the FM Kirby Training Center, or the Emerson and Dolores Reich Center